Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to each and everybody. This is me, no, it's not me, it's you, Honest, in conjunction with more raw than what you bargained for. Another terrorist plot, another terrorist scenario, another terrorist rehearsal, another terrorist activity. This time in London. London Bridge is falling down.
Really freaked out. He said there's somebody like randomly stabbing people.
I'm terrified.
Breaking news now at 11. Tragedy in London. 6 people dead, 48 wounded.
What's actually going on here? What on earth is actually going on here? Whose agenda is being served here? Whose agenda? Is it the media's agenda? Because more bad news is good news, and bad news sells, and bad news travels fast, and bad news gets people hooked onto the television, gets us all sitting down, hooked up, hypnotized, mesmerized by the lies, by the deceit, by the death, by the desperation, by the bodies, by the... Whose agenda is being served here? Is it the media's agenda? Is it the media's agenda? Is it that bad news travels fast and bad news is really good news because good news is that the bad news sells? The bad news gets us all hooked there, sitting in front of the television, hypnotized and mesmerized by the lies that is being spread by the TV? Is it that bad news is good news because it sells and keeps us all hooked into the adrenal fluid, hooked onto the umbilical cord of the television? Bad news sells. Pictures of death, pictures of desperation, pictures of people running away from terrorist scenes, pictures of police in guns and tanks on streets and flashing red and blue lights, gets us all hooked and mesmerized. Is that what's being served on the agenda? Is that what's on the menu? The media's agenda? Is it that the government is serving us? Is it the government's agenda? That most of us don't really see the connections between the media and the government, because who owns the media are the same people that take the politicians and other business leaders out to dinner. They wine and dine the politicians.
In Britain, billionaire newspaper owner Rupert Murdoch spent the day on the defensive. He appeared before an ethics inquiry that's looking into the long relationship between his media empire and the British government. As the CBC's Adrian Arsenault reports, Murdoch denies ever taking advantage of his unique position.
For 30 years, as British prime ministers came and most certainly went, a constant character in their worlds was Rupert Murdoch. The billionaire media mogul whose press holdings shout at the British every day was the man at Christmas parties, tea parties, yacht parties, in back rooms and at the back door of number 10 Downing Street.
Questions to the Prime Minister.
Cozy, yes. How cozy?
And I think on all sides of the House there's a bit of a need for a hand on heart. We all did too much cozying up to Rupert Murdoch. I think we'd agree. Hand on heart. We all did too much cozying up to Rupert Murdoch. I think we'd agree.
So now the uncomfortable questions. Did access mean undue Murdoch influence on policy or business?
The evidence I shall give shall be the truth.
Figuring that out, the core pursuit of an inquiry that will soon be calling on the current and former prime ministers to testify.
I welcomed the opportunity because I wanted to put certain myths to bed.
What's the myth, Mr. Murdoch?
That I used the influence of the Sun or the supposed political power to get favourable treatment. I've never asked the Prime Minister for anything.
That might technically be true, but a man like Murdoch doesn't need to ask.
It's the art of what you might call quid pro quo.
His connections are the talk of talk radio.
That's because Murdoch owns 40% of the press. And the belief is, if the Murdoch press decides that you're a bozo, that you're not worth voting for, that's what they'll say, and you won't get elected.
The perception of influence mattered today, particularly whether Murdoch used relationships to try to secure a takeover of the network B-Sky B. Nope, never came up, he said. Not even at Downing Street meetings with the British Prime Minister David Cameron when Murdoch says he was asked to use the back door.
There are reasons for that. They always seem to don't want me to be photographed going out the front door.
This is all so awkward for the politicians, and already political heads are starting to roll. A special advisor to a minister, a man who gave too much information to the Murdochs, has just lost his job. It's just one job, but likely not the last. The testimony continues, and it is all getting closer to the top. Adrienne Arsenault, CBC News, London.
They procure the politicians. They influence and cajole and manipulate the politicians. They pull the strings of the politicians. Yes, the owners of the media, the Murdochs, the Rothschilds, the controllers of the media are actually sitting down, whining and dining with the politicians and other business interests as they establish their rules, as they establish their agenda on us, the media and the government. Whose agenda is being served here?
Hand on heart, we all did too much cozying up to Rupert Murdoch. I think we'd agree.
They introduce to us new memes and new themes. For example, the political campaigning has been stalled, or it's been put on hold because of the terrorist bombs. That's twice in the last 10 days that the political campaigning has been put on hold.
Britain is in mourning, and so is the political class. Every flag in Westminster near Parliament at half-mast. Parliament had been dissolved anyway before national elections, but the Manchester attack brought an end to all campaigning. All the parties agreed on stopping. The Prime Minister spoke with rage in her eyes and in her voice at what seems to have been a deliberate attempt to kill children.
We struggle to comprehend the warped and twisted mind that sees a room packed with young children not as a scene to cherish, but as an opportunity for carnage.
Every other political party, every politician said the same.
Absolutely shocking news. It's the most appalling act of violence that's taken the lives of young people who were at a music event to enjoy themselves.
This was a terrorist attack deliberately targeted at children having the time of their lives. It was cowardly, it was deliberate, it is beyond wicked.
After this, any sort of political campaigning would have been seen to be in such poor taste as to make it inconceivable. But at some point in the coming days, when the vigils and the church services are finished, they will have to start all over again. They'll have to gauge pretty carefully when is the right time.
You could say, well, the politicians, the Conservatives realise that they're fighting now a losing battle. Theresa May thought she had it all sewn up before, and then all of a sudden out of the rabbit's hat came Jeremy Corbyn and the Labour Party with some themes and with some policies that really appeal to the people, like let's wipe away student debt, let's get rid of the student loan scheme, let's get rid of the finance and the financial burden on students, let's get rid of this £50,000 debt that you'll have when you graduate, let's renationalise the rail industry, let's do the right things by the people. Perhaps Jeremy Corbyn is actually pulling the rabbit out of the hat. Whose agenda is actually being served here? Is it the agenda of the terrorists? Their agenda is to spread misery, is to maim, is to kill, is to cajole, is to disrupt, is to spoil and murder and maim and create havoc. Is it the agenda of the terrorists? Is it the agenda of ISIS? Many of us that listen to the news and watch the news and soak up the media, we don't really understand. We don't see the connections between the terrorists and the United States government, between the terrorists and the United Kingdom's government. We don't understand that ISIS is an offshoot of Al-Qaeda, and Al-Qaeda was something that was constructed by the United States government to fight the Russian forces in Afghanistan in the 1980s and 90s. And that ISIS is actually funded, created and funded and armed by the United States government. This is not me talking some conspiratorial fluff. This is declassified information that you can go on your Google search and do a Google search right now and find out for yourself. Most of us don't know that ISIS really stands for the Israeli Secret Intelligence Service.
We thought we should ask, what shall we call it in English? can translate the Hebrew words, as I said, Mossad's Institute, but when they write a letter to their friends in the CIA or the British intelligence, what do they call themselves? It took a while. It was a matter of asking the Prime Minister's spokesman. The best you could do, because officially the Mossad is under the Prime Minister's office. And I think he sort of wondered why you want to know and all that, so we explained. And he came up with the Israeli Secret Intelligence Service. I mean, if it were to have initials, it would be ISIS.
Most of us don't really know that ISIS is fronted by a lot of actors and perpetrators. Most of us don't know. We don't look beneath the surface. So on the surface of things, it appears that what's happening now, what's being served up to us now, with this latest London bombing, with the London bridges falling down scenario, what's being served up to us now is another plate of wickedness and hate from the Islamic State. But we need to scratch beneath the surface. We need to scratch beneath the veneer. We need to have a look beneath the surface to see what is the actual reality, what is the actual factual state of things. Is it just another smokescreen? Now, you could say, look, mister, it's not me, it's you. Honest, look, mister, more raw than what you bargained for. You're clutching at straws. But let me tell it to you like this. If most of us knew that from the 600 odd politicians, MPs in the Houses of Parliament, from that number, half of them have criminal records. Nearly 100 of them in the last 2 years have been arrested for drink driving. Over 50 of them have been arrested and investigated for corruption and for embezzlement and for fraud. Then would that make you think twice about voting for any of them? Would that make you think twice about how you think about these politicians? Would that make you think twice about how these politicians are actually running and ruining our country?
The British Parliament has passed a new lobbying bill that restricts spending on election campaigns, but that doesn't stop the widespread attempts to buy government influence at all other times, often ending in scandal, as RT's Laura Smith reports.
Lobbying exerting influence on lawmakers has become something of a dirty word around Westminster. Methods of lobbying, according to the Parliament website, can include sending letters and making presentations. Of course, it doesn't mention lobbing MPs wads of cash. But it's the scandal that lobbying is most famous for. Officials taking cash for questions, cash for Cameron, $250,000 to have dinner with the PM, and cash for doing parliamentary work, caught in a Sunday Times sting. Westminster is so scandal-ridden that the Standards Watchdog and its chairman, Lord Bew, have decided MPs need special training to help them not to abuse their position. So it seems pretty obvious to me that MPs shouldn't be, for example, accepting cash to ask questions in Parliament or selling time with the Prime Minister. Why isn't it obvious to MPs themselves?
This committee has a long-term role, and the long-term role is to defend certain ethical principles of selflessness, integrity, honesty, openness in public life. And we're looking at ways to actually promulgate those principles throughout the public sector and see them properly embedded.
Back in 2009, David Cameron said lobbying would be the next big scandal, and sure enough, the stories keep on coming. In the latest example, experts who are advising the government on sugar consumption have been revealed to be working for confectionery giants, including Mars and Coca-Cola. These measures are meant to increase people's confidence in the people they elect to represent them. But one wonders if it's confidence boosting that they need, teaching right from wrong. And the real kicker, the training will be based on courses given to lawyers and everyone's favourite ethical citizens, bankers.
Would that make you think twice about the state of politics in the United Kingdom? Would that make you think twice about how and why we allow these perverts and these punks and these paid politicians to present us and represent us on a national scale? That we allow them, they're our chosen spokespeople. These spookspeople, these ghouls and goblins, these demons and so-called Democrats, they're the ones that we vote for. Would that make you think twice about our status quo? if I told you that a lot of them are under investigation for child abuse and for other criminal activities? Would it make you think twice?
Finally, the British media have revealed the names of 4 former key figures at the Westminster, believed to have been at the heart of a controversial child abuse case in the country. The names include Margaret Thatcher's former Parliamentary Secretary, Sir Peter Morrison, former Home Secretary Leon Britton, former diplomat and MI6 man Sir Peter Hayman, and former Tory Minister Sir William Van Strobensee. Their names have reportedly appeared on a series of government documents that are yet to be released. The alleged child abuses in which the 4 deceased figures had been involved occurred at a children's home in Northern Ireland.
Well, the names that have come through, they are definitely senior political figures, and it's really posed a very important and very interesting question. And critics are now saying that the government have covered up these names to protect these senior political figures. And what that shows is that they feel it's more important to protect these figures rather than the protection of children.
First, we will do everything we can to allow the full investigation of child abuse and the prosecution of its perpetrators.
We're going to leave no stone unturned to find out the truth about what happened.
Would it make you think twice if I told you that a former Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, Ted Heath or Edward Heath, was a known paedophile? And according to David Icke and other authors and scholars and commentators, he was actually a known satanic murderer. Edward Heath was fed by Jimmy Savile. He was fed children by Jimmy Savile. Jimmy Savile's ring of paedophilia activity, it ran high, or should we say low, within the circles of politics in the United Kingdom. He had access to the to every single Prime Minister since Ted Heath. After Ted Heath, there was Margaret Thatcher. So you'll see Jimmy Savile and Margaret Thatcher. After Thatcher, there was John Major. After John Major, there was Tony Blair. After Tony Blair, there was the unelected Gordon Brown. After Gordon Brown, we've got this punk now, whatever his name is, Cameron. And after Cameron, we have another unelected Prime Minister, which is calling for elections right now. But it looks like the elections might not actually go ahead because of these so-called terrorist activities. But the paedophile connection, the satanic agenda, the hidden agenda, is that the paedophile activities within Parliament, within the members of Parliament, run very deep. And rather than let the people focus on the reality that every Prime Minister in this country has ties to terrorists, has ties to paedophiles, has ties to satanic rituals, the media is paid for and played by the government so that they present a program which diverts people's attention away from the paedophilia activities, from the satanic activities, from the money-grabbing activities of our government. It diverts people's attention away. So the media sets up and establishes a particular agenda. Let's just call it terrorism, or let's call it the election, or let's call it Brexit, or let's call it, the election campaigning has been suspended. They set up a particular agenda, then they repeat particular themes and particular memes about that agenda, and then that agenda becomes set in concrete, or at least set inside our minds, until they want to change that particular agenda. You see, the problem is, people, when we get to understand that these politicians, these punks, these paedophiles, these perpetrators of the fraud, when we get to understand that these people are nothing but low moral individuals, that these people are nothing other than human beings like you or like me. In fact, they're worse than you or me because they have positions of power, and with power comes responsibility, and these people are abjugating their responsibility. These people are neglecting their responsibility. So they're worse than you or me because most of us, we don't have that responsibility to look out for the interest of the nation, to look out for the interest of the people. Because if you or me had that responsibility, I'm sure you would be able to execute your responsibility with much more efficacy, with much more decency than what these people are doing, because they're in their palaces, they're in their parliaments, sitting, drinking, eating, cavorting, partying at your expense. Just look at the MP's expense fiasco.
I've said the system has to change. I've said it's wrong and it should be amended. We want to abolish the present system.
The whole system is rotten. It needs to change. I've been a part of that system and I apologise for that.
The reporters misunderstood the system.
It's not a question of, I think, feeling, well, we've done something wrong. It's just the system is wrong.
The system's got to change for sure.
We've got to reform the system.
Under the system, it wasn't necessary to put receipts in.
The system is wrong. It needs to be changed.
This system is not fit for purpose, and we have long acknowledged that.
I value my reputation and the reputation of Parliament far more than I do the right just to claim this money under a flawed system.
The public must have confidence in the system by which members of Parliament of all political parties are paid, and I want to ensure that the system is the right one for the future.
I've complied with the rules of the House, the rules of the Inland Revenue, and, you know, that's the situation as it is.
I'm very confident that nothing I've done is against the rules or the spirit of the rules.
The arrangements that I have made are within the rules.
I've acted within the rules. It's an error, which obviously I wish had not happened.
They were within the rules, and that is why they advised me to do that.
All the claims that I made were agreed in advance with the Fees Office, all of them.
I don't believe I have broken any rules at all.
I've done nothing wrong, and so I'm not apologising.
Mr McCann, you must have known they weren't within the spirit of the rules, Mr McCann.
No, I'm going to move on now.
They're in there embezzling, they're in there doing tax fraud, they're in there claiming every penny they can. Does that signify politicians that are there with the people's interests at heart? In my mind, it doesn't. In my mind, it signals to me that they're only there to get all they can get for themselves and to line their own pockets and to build up their own personal empires, to forward and further their careers at the expense of you and I, at the expense of you and me, at the expense of we. If I explain to you that the government uses the media as a smokescreen to keep us fooled and cajoled and waylaid and misled, then we have to try and ascertain, we have to try and entertain what is the real agenda. If you're one of these people, like I have been in the past, that entertain the ideas that there are lots of Pakistanis in Rotherham, in Oldham, in the Yorkshire Dales and in Lancashire that are preying on the youngsters, there are the Pakistani Sharia court paedophile rings, then that's another one of the smoke screens. Yes, it might be true, but there are no more Pakistanis than what there are politicians hunting for the children. And it's those who own and control the care homes, that own and control the child abuse centres, who are more culpable than those that snatch one or two children or abuse one or two children, because it's the owners and controllers which are culpable. I hope you understand what I'm saying here. If you look at the relations and the ties of those that run the children's homes, for example, then they will have more in common, they will have more ties and associations with the politicians, with the police commissioners, with the members of parliament, than those few Pakistanis that are caught actually in their paedophile activities. These people actually procure the children for the members of parliament, for the royal family. And you think I'm just talking fluff. Well, if you think I'm talking fluff, then this is more raw than what you bargained for. Tune out. But if you think there might be some semblance of sanity in these words that I'm speaking, then please continue to listen. The question that I'm asking is, whose agenda is being served to us? And why and what is the media presenting to us when they, for example, present Pakistani paedophiles, Muslim paedophiles in Rotherham, preying on poor, innocent children. The BBC put a series on just recently. I've not watched it. I don't need to watch it to know that what they're doing is programming the people to look at this, to look at the Pakistani taxi drivers, the Muslim community in Rotherham, to look at the vulnerable children as being they're creating an issue for the people to focus on. Whereas the real agenda, let's just call it the British Pizzagate. It's bigger than Pizzagate. The real agenda is the fact that the royal family, the members of parliament of this country, are the ones who are actually actively involved in child paedophiliac rings. They're the ones that pull the strings. That's the real story. So show me a BBC presentation about that. Show me a BBC docudrama about Prince Charles and his satanic rituals, about the death of Diana and how that's tied into the child paedophiliac activities. Show me a documentary or docudrama about how trauma-based programming is used within the elite family circles to keep them in line, to keep them out of the people's interest, to keep them out of trying to do things for the people. Show me a documentary about how the Queen has allegedly been responsible for the death and kidnapping and murdering and maiming and sacrifice of hundreds, if not thousands, of children within the United Kingdom. Show me the docudrama about that. And then I'll say, okay, well, the BBC might not be as partial as it appears to me to be.
Monarchy is by definition incompatible with democracy. You cannot have a government chosen by election and at the same time have individuals occupying positions of power simply because they were born the sons or daughters of families who already have political power. It was on this principle that the English people fought a civil war, made a revolution and cut off their king's head in the 17th century. When, after 10 years of being one of the first republics in the world, a monarch was restored to the British throne, it came to be understood that no king or queen would ever seek to rule without Parliament. Indeed, as Britain became a democracy, supporters of the parliamentary system insisted that the British monarchy has no real political power. The Victorian political theorist Walter Bagehot, for instance, wrote that the monarchy was merely a decorative part of the constitution and that real power was exercised by the cabinet. But even now, in the 21st century, is this really true? The royal family is, apart from anything else and beyond dispute, very wealthy, and money is one sort of power. And we pay for the royal family to remain wealthy. Their cost to the taxpayer has been estimated at anywhere between £40 million and £200 million. More than this, recent reports have revealed how much the royal family routinely seeks to directly and personally change the decisions of government. Here we look at how the hereditary power of the royal family still has an impact on the course of British political life.